I am being joined right now by Oleksandr Merezhko, who is the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of Parliament of Ukraine. Thank you very much for joining me on the telecast. And first things first, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, has already arrived in Kiev. What is your take on a first step being taken by India to have a strengthened, more concrete relationship with Ukraine?
Well, first of all, we welcome the Prime Minister of India, because to us, in terms of our relations between Ukraine and India, it's a truly historic visit. And we appreciate that India took part in the first inaugural peace summit devoted to combating Russian aggression against Ukraine. And it's very important. And this visit paves the way for developing our relations between our two countries. And we do hope that India will play a constructive role in trying to be firmly on the side of international law. And we hope that India will support Ukraine, which is victim of Russian aggression.
Okay. There have been meetings that have been held by the Indian Prime Minister and the President of Ukraine on the sidelines of a number of global summits that have taken place. What is the difference in the meetings that have been held in the past between the two heads of the states versus the visit that has now been made by the Prime Minister? He has arrived in Kiev today.
Well, its visit is extremely important in many ways, and we have big hopes. We hope that India will join the final communique, which was presented during the first peace summit. And we also hope that India will play a constructive role in the peacemaking process. And, you know, for us, India is the biggest democracy in the world. And Ukraine is also democratic countries. And we believe that we should be together. We should be on the side of democracy and free world, not on the side of authoritarian regimes.
Oleksandr, there was open criticism that was witnessed from Ukraine, from President Zelensky himself, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi paid a visit to President Putin. This was in July. Is there an upswing that is expected now that the Prime Minister has decided to meet President Zelensky and actually make an effort to pay a visit to Kiev?
When Prime Minister Modi visited Moscow, we remember that what happened in Ukraine the same day, Putin bombarded Kiev, and Putin deliberately destroyed Children's Hospital in Kiev. And against the background of Prime Minister of India visit to Moscow, it looked really awful. And it also damaged the image of India. And that's why this visit to Kiev is important, because, again, India is supposed to be for international law and against aggression, because each country in the world is interested in supporting international legal order and peace and global security. So this visit helps to enhance the image of India in the world.
Oleksandr, do you think India and Prime Minister Narendra Modi could be the country that could act as a mediator between the conflict that has lasted over 2 years between both the countries, keeping in mind that it has cordial relations, a direct line of communication, both between Prime Minister Zelensky and President Zelensky and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and on the other side, President Putin and Prime Minister Modi?
Without any doubt, India, as the biggest democracy, can seriously contribute to the peace. But we're talking about just peace. Peace based on the UN Charter and principles of international law, such as territorial integrity and sovereign equality, and of course, non-use of force. And if India is supporting this peace based on international law, just peace, we welcome Indian efforts in this regard. But of course, we should distinguish between peace and appeasement of the aggressor. And I hope that India is for just peace and against appeasement of the aggressor. In this regard, India, of course, can play a very important role.
Oleksandr, when we talk about the bilateral ties and the trade between both the nations had plummeted right after the war, is there expectation that there are going to be more agreements, memorandums of understanding that might be signed between both the leaders now that Prime Minister is in Ukraine and is meeting President Zelensky?
I'm not sure about details, but I'm confident that some agreements, especially in the field of economic ties, economic cooperation, will be signed today, because it's a historically important visit. It's the visit at the highest level, and for the development of relations between our nations, between our people, it's crucially important to have such agreements and to push forward relations, economic relations, trade relations, cultural relations between our countries. So I'm sure that some agreements will be signed today.
How important and integral do you feel is the people-to-people connect between both the countries? There is a significant number of Indian diaspora, Indian community that lives, resides and works, has businesses, investments in Ukraine. Will this further help in ameliorating ties between both countries?
People-to-people diplomacy, people-to-people communication is crucially important. I myself, I was a professor at the Jindal Global University for a year, and I really like India. To me, it's one of the best countries in the world. And I really appreciate when I see lots of students from India studying in Kiev. Before the full-scale invasion, we had many students, for example, at the medical institutes in Kiev. And I do hope that more citizens of India will come to Kiev and more Ukrainians will be visiting India. It's extremely important for the future of our relations.
Yes, you mentioned about when the war hit Ukraine, the Russian invasion, the Russian aggression. It was a very sensitive time for India as well, because there were a number of students, like you mentioned, the medical students studying in a number of medical schools in Ukraine. They had to be airlifted. We had this massive operation that had been launched. Could there also be a possibility of the Indian students going back and re-enrolling in these medical colleges, because they abruptly ended their courses, the terms that were continuing, they did not even clear the exams, did not even graduate from these universities because of the war that hit Ukraine?
Despite the full-scale invasion, we still have foreign students studying, for example, at one of our medical universities. And I'm not sure whether there are Indian students or not, but, you know, they have always been very welcome in Kiev. And I hope that as soon as hostilities, as soon as the war stops, we'll have more students. The more Indian students come to Kiev to study, the better for Ukraine, and it's excellent for both countries, for both peoples. So it's my dream to have as many as possible students from India, and we are eager to create all necessary conditions for them to study.
Okay. Also, talking about India's stance, it has made it clear that it is not going to be favoring one country over the other. A number of United Nations resolutions have been passed where India has taken a very cautious stand. How does Ukraine view India's position on this?
Well, we're not asking India to support any party to the conflict, to the war. All we are asking from India to be consistent in its support of international law, in its struggle against aggression, because each country in the world, including India, should be interested in supporting the UN Charter and principles of international law. So this is about international law. It's not as much about Ukraine. And India cannot be neutral in the face of the crime of aggression committed by one country against the other country, like Ukraine. That's why we're asking India to be determined, to be decisive in protection of international law and international peace.
Okay. I'm also going to raise the point of the issue that continues to persist. It was the G20 summit, the leaders summit that had taken place in Delhi. We'd spoken about the joint communique, and it had been tapered down in terms of Russia being directly called the aggressor. The language had been diluted. How was Ukraine? Would Ukraine have wanted to see something different coming out of the joint communique?
We want other countries to recognize legal reality and to call a spade, to be honest. Because when we use the term aggression, it's international legal term. It's the only correct legal qualification of Russian actions in the world arena. That's why it's important to call the crime by name and to recognize the reality. And we hope that India will be supporting the documents, international documents like resolutions of the General Assembly or declarations and communique of such summits as G20, for example, which openly state the fact that we have a crime of aggression committed by one country against the other. And it's totally unacceptable in the 21st century to resort to force in violation of the UN Charter.
Okay. Oleksandr, even as we speak about India and Ukraine bilateral ties, there you have it, visuals on our screens of Prime Minister Narendra Modi being greeted and welcomed by President Zelensky. And that's the visual that is going to be spoken about, talked about, played on media channels, spoken about, printed in publications across the globe. How important does this visit and its significance have, keeping in mind that this is the first time any Indian head of state has arrived in Ukraine? Do we at this point in time also ponder as to why this visit by a head of state from India has been delayed up until now? And then, of course, is this the direct consequence of the Ukraine-Russia conflict that this visit has been planned?
Well, that's why we call this visit historic visit, because it's the first visit of Indian Prime Minister to Ukraine. And everyone now is talking about this visit. I just came back from the sitting of the Parliament, the plenary. We had a plenary day, and I wish the Indian Prime Minister would speak in front of the Ukrainian Parliament. If not this time, hopefully next time. And we invite Indian Prime Minister to speak before our Parliament, the Verkhovna Rada. So it's tremendously important, and it's a huge sensation. I would use even this term to characterize this visit. But we hope for continuation of such direct communication between the President of Ukraine and the Prime Minister of India.
Oleksandr, like I mentioned, President Zelensky has welcomed Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Those visuals on our screens where the Prime Minister of our country and President Zelensky are honoring the memory of children at the Martyrologist Exposition, which is the Ukraine National Museum. What is the significance? How important does this Ukraine National Museum hold?
Especially now, after the beginning of Russian war against Ukraine, everything related to historical memory is important because it became a symbol of Ukrainian resilience and Ukrainian movement to freedom. And of course, we pay huge respect to the Prime Minister of India, and we would like to share with him our history, our culture, and that's why we invite him to see for himself what Ukraine is like. There is no substitute for direct communication with the President of Ukraine, with Ukrainian government and Ukrainian people, because the more we have such context, the more Indian people understand that we have a lot in common. Our nations, people of India and people of Ukraine, have truly a lot in common. And we have very strong foundation for development, further our ties.
Oleksandr, talking about the latest incursion of Ukraine into Kursk, which has at this point of time been taken control of by the Ukrainian army. How does the war pan out from here?
Well, we have under the UN Charter, under Article 51, which gives Ukraine the right to individual self-defense. We are exercising our right to self-defense using offensive operations in the territory of the aggressor state. It shows that Russia is weak, that Russia is not capable, and Putin is not capable to guarantee security to its people. Russia is not capable to hold its territories. And interestingly, people in these territories, they don't put any resistance to Ukrainian army because they don't want to defend their dictator. They don't want to die for a bloody totalitarian dictator and war criminal Putin. And it's very telling what's going on right now.
Again, the big question, everybody's mind at this point of time is boggled. When does the war end?
Well, it depends on India also, because Russia is dependent on India, and India can put enough pressure to make Russia to respect international law and to stop aggression. We can do it together. That's why Indian stance, position of India is so important. Together, we can stop Russian war of aggression against Ukraine and save many human lives, including lives of civilian population, lives of children. We can do it together, and we should do it together.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.